It's been a wonderful day so far. We have tried to jam-pack a lot of things into a short 8-hour period where we've heard from 5 leading academics, 4 widely respected and read and watched journalists, and now we will shift a little bit and move from the 20,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet explorations of Wisconsin politics and civic life and journalism to a more personal conversation with 2 Wisconsin legends who have served our state over a number of years, who also were very close to the person we honor with our conference today, Bill Kraus. And so we are delighted to welcome former Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin, Barbara Lawton. She was our 43rd Lieutenant Governor, served with Governor Jim Doyle from 2003 to 2011, first woman in Wisconsin elected to that position. She served as President and CEO of Americans for Campaign Reform, was co-founder of Issue One, both of which seek to limit the influence of money in politics, something we've heard about across our panels today, and is an advisor for civic associations, including the Millennial Action Project and Wisconsin's Institute for Public Policy. We are also joined by former State Senate Majority Leader and head of the Department of Health and Family Services of Wisconsin, Tim Cullen. Tim served on the Wisconsin State Senate from 1975 to 87. He served as the Majority Leader during much of that time. He was appointed in 1987 by our keynote speaker, Governor Tommy Thompson, to serve as the head of the Wisconsin Department of Health and Family Services. He later went on to become vice president of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wisconsin from 1988 to 2007, was re-elected to the Wisconsin Senate, where he served from 2010 to 2014, right over that period of Act 10 that you've heard invoked a few different times today. From 2018 to 2022, he served as the elected chair for Common Cause, which, of course, as you know, Bill Kraus co-chaired for many years as well, the largest nonpartisan political reform advocacy organization in Wisconsin. And once our guests behave, we'll be ready to begin. They like each other. They get along well. This is a refreshing in Wisconsin politics to see. So it's really fabulous to have you both here today to come and share your experiences working with Bill Kraus. I know it's meaningful to Tony and others who knew Bill well. And so I just want to start with, tell me how you met him. Yeah, take it away.
I met Bill Kraus. I'd heard about him a lot. He's a Stevens Point guy. There's quite a Stevens Point crowd. Bill Kraus, Bill Bablich, who was a majority leader before me, and Justice, and of course Lee Dreyfus. So I heard about Bill through Bill Bablich, but met him just after Dreyfus won. And he came down here to run the state for Dreyfus and help him run it anyway, at least. And I was a chair of the Labor Committee, and he came over to see me. It was about an appointee that Dreyfus wanted to make that organized labor did not want appointed. And that's the first time I met Bill, but I heard he was a great guy. And I said, you know, I don't care if that guy has a job in the Dreyfus administration. I have nothing against the person whatsoever. I said, but can you get him somewhere else? They were going to put him in charge of unemployment compensation, which meant he wasn't going to be in a position to deny people's appeal. People who wanted to think they deserved unemployment compensation, he could deny their appeal. And organized labor and myself personally, I didn't think that's the kind of guy I really wanted there, given what I knew about his background. So Kraus says, okay, let me take a look at it or something like that. And the next thing I know, there's a note in my office, like, I don't know, a month later. I didn't see him. I must not have been there when he came by. Note says, names the guy, the note just says, Joe Smith. That wasn't the guy's name. He said, Joe Smith will be transferred within 3 months. Bill. And that's what happened. He was transferred within 3 months. But I came to really, really like the guy. I love being around him. a lot of times I like to go to lunch with 3 or 4 people and everybody talks about everything. I loved going to lunch with just Bill Kraus. And then tell my Irish self to shut up and listen to Bill Kraus. And so really got to know him well. And then, as was mentioned, he was on Common Cause for 20 years. He was chairman for at least 10. And he finally decided to give it up back in about 2017, I think it was. And I was on Common Cause board, and he suggested, and others suggested, maybe I should replace him. And so we decided to play it as we announced that Common Cause was now going to have a youth movement. And that the 91-year-old chairman, Bill Kraus, was stepping down and being replaced by a 73-year-old. And a couple people in the state laughed as well as you, so thank you very much. But it was an honor, to say the least, to replace Bill Kraus. He does a great job. If you want to talk about the things, I don't know if you want to talk about, turn it over to Barbara, but some things that I particularly noticed about him that I really liked, but maybe I should just shut up here.
We'll get to it.
It's not easy, is it, to pass
Isn't
it?
It should not be easy for a senator or a former senator to shut up. It's just not.
No, we know that about anybody who's held office. I mean, gather 2 or more together in the produce aisle and you've got a speech, right? But no, and it's because Bill inspired that kind of just deep love and passion and fun, right? Sense of fun. I met Bill, I think, when I was first time running with Ed Garvey for governor and lieutenant governor in 1998. So in 1997, as we launched the campaign, Bill and Ed knew each other. They were both panelists on public TV, and that was when nobody missed it on Friday nights because they were so good at analyzing the politics of the week and in good humor and from different perspectives, but always sharing the perspective that things should be good. We should be able to get this government to work. We both believe in it. So he came to even though he was a Republican, and God knows Ed and I were Democrats, that he came to observe, follow, write about, train our young people who were running the campaign, really, because he so believed in what we were doing, which was to make money in politics the issue of a statewide campaign for governor. And so he traveled with us, and I mean that. He trained kids, gave us ideas, taught us about that kind of transparency to the press that will get you earned coverage, because you can't buy it when you're running a campaign like we did, and it was wonderful. And then we served together in 1998 or the beginning of 99 on the Citizens Panel for a Clean Elections option that was run by Nat Heffernan. We called it the Heffernan Commission, and we traveled the state to draw citizens out into a conversation about what needs to be fixed and for us to have clean elections. And of course, what we discovered was it was campaign finance reform that needed to happen. But we'll, I'm sure, talk about that more. But that's how I met Bill. It's great fun.
So we've talked today about Wisconsinites' hunger for compromise and Wisconsinites' deep partisan divisions across a variety of issues. One thing that happened in state government during the eras where you all were serving, and Bill was serving, or contributing to politics and public life, was that there were compromises made between the two parties that often maybe would take place behind closed doors. Dan Kaufman alluded this to a bit in a less positive light, talking about how redistricting sometimes happened last time behind closed doors and then was released. But sometimes, compromise happens behind closed doors. Can you take us inside your offices, having conversations with Bill about particular compromises that you all made together to govern here in Wisconsin?
one of the things that Bill said over and over, but the first time I heard Bill say it was the first time I'd ever heard it said, was the perfect is enemy of the good. And it began to drive me crazy, I will tell you, because there are certain things that you absolutely should never compromise. We as women know about those things, and people who are honest in politics know that there are lines you shouldn't cross. But the general idea was, he said that you have two obstacles to change. One is the status quo, and one is the purest population, and that he in the end would always choose the status quo over the purists. But he understood that that's not where the whole thing rests. And so we would work on ways that we could come at a system of campaign finance reform. Tony lent me a tome, literally, of his blogs so I could listen to his voice in a way before today. And he notes way back in 2005 that 69% of the electorate in Wisconsin are all for campaign finance reform. No, 80%, sorry. 80% are for campaign finance reform. And 69% of Wisconsinites are opposed to concealed carry. And that month that he wrote that, the law that was being proposed for campaign finance reform never even got a committee hearing, and concealed carry passed with votes from both parties in great abundance. So what the compromising, it seems to me, is in helping bring an electorate to make their elected officials understand we actually will throw you out of office if you don't respond to what is important to us. But we haven't found that way. They have in Michigan, right? But we haven't. So that's another thing to talk about, but I'll let you say something.
Same question. So an example of when you work together to compromise to make some kind of accomplishment.
Well, Bill was easy to work with, as was Governor Dreyfus. Governor Dreyfus was I think, I have to go back and think that the governor, or that Bill Kraus, my view of him anyway, was he thought the state ought to be governed from the center. The Democrats a little center left, probably Republicans a little center right, but he thought the state ought to be governed from the center, somewhere near it, depending on the governor's politics. So talking with him about agreement, compromises and stuff wasn't that difficult. I kind of thought a lot of myself. I kind of thought of things quite a bit that way as well.
Didn't you think he always said the only game for adults is politics? And the notion of compromise was an essential part of that, right? Of navigating the game.
I don't remember him saying that, but that's what he would have. I can certainly understand that he would have said that. One thing I wanted to mention, which is a little bit different, but this is about carrying on the tradition of Bill Kraus and dealing with the problems going forward. And one of the things I thought was, after listening all day today and thinking about this, is that the problems that Bill Kraus dealt with, I don't believe they were tough at the time. I don't think they're as tough as what we're dealing with going forward. And I think Bill would be the first to agree. And there was a lot of talk about gerrymandering here today. Gerrymandering is about power. It's just about getting, drawing a map so that your party has power. And no one should doubt for a second that Republicans are not the only party that likes power. And we are going to have, in connection with that issue of gerrymandering, we're going to have an election this spring for the Supreme Court that's going to look like it wasn't much partisanship at all this past November, earlier this month, compared to what we're going to see this spring. Because with the Chief Justice, who's in one of the considered four conservatives of the seven, she's retiring. It's her seat. And whoever wins that seat is that group, the left or the right, is going to control the Supreme Court, including the issue of gerrymandering. And so it is, they won't be calling themselves Democrats and Republicans, but it's going to be so blatantly obvious and unbelievable how partisan it is going to be next spring. And we'll see what happens. What concerns me, though, is that if there's a majority of so-called liberals, or whatever you want to call the four that aren't the conservatives, they are going to be under pressure. They're going to be given maps that are going to be tilted towards the Democrats. How far the tilt goes, I don't know. But it worries me that the idea that if we can just get the Supreme Court changed, that we'll get the Supreme Court to go right down the middle and leave it, competitive districts, as many as possible. You can't have all competitive districts, literally. I mean, you couldn't have a competitive district right here in this part of Madison.
By the way, somebody, I don't remember who on the panel, said that now there are only 10 of 132 legislative districts that are competitive. Bill wrote about that in a blog in 2004. So it's not really changed. But I think it's really important. Things are a mess, but all of Bill's work, remember when he retired from the private sector, and when he retired from, which was a second round after he was paid for work in the public sector, he became totally actively engaged in advocating for campaign finance reform, and then really made a shift later as the money and politics changed in the, let's say, 2008, it really started seriously, and by 2012, people weren't willing to give up money in politics because they thought that online donating was democratizing money in politics. But he then was looking at gerrymandering, and both of those things have to do with his fundamental concern for fair representation, that all of us are truly represented in government. And as he put it, let the people in. And that was his whole recurring theme over all the years that he was observing and writing and talking about it, is we don't have enough citizen politicians. And how are we going to have them when we have devised now a politics that is of and by mercenaries? So his work was to create the terms by which the citizens would have a path to active and powerful participation. And when we think of what happened in Michigan, it was those ballot referendums that allowed them to change gerrymandering. Bill did not like that idea of the ballot referendums, and I never did either. I always said, people can buy those more easily than they can buy a politician, which is pretty easy these days. And Paul Allen, a guy in Seattle, he was supposed to have X number of signatures to go on a ballot measure to get money for his stadium, and he didn't want to sully himself getting those signatures, so he convinced the legislature to take a contribution to the state that would then allow him on the ballot with that measure without having to go door to door and get signatures. So I've been opposed to them too, until I saw what happened in Michigan, and until we see that today, just like 20 years ago, nothing is changing in the makeup of our legislature, and it's not representative of who we are.
What do you all think are our paths forward when it comes to governing in Wisconsin? A lot of what we have seen over the past few years in the Evers administration is Republican state legislature passes bill, Democratic governor vetoes bill, Democratic governor calls special session, Republican legislature gavels in, gavels out, there's no discussion in the special session. What are paths to break this pattern of behavior? And are there lessons to draw from Bill's career that would be paths forward for our elected leaders to consider?
Well, it all comes back to gerrymandering. That situation doesn't occur when one house is Democrat, one is Republican, or the margin is very, very close. And gerrymandering is really, in fact, all this talk about all the big money in politics. There isn't much big money in a gerrymandered legislature. Why? Unless you want to just buy the legislator by giving them money they don't need when they get a guaranteed victory because of the way the map is drawn, or you can give the money to the person that's going to lose could make you feel better. I don't know, but if you have a statewide race for governor, U.S. senator, then the big money, that's where the big money is the real big problem, because both sides can't get enough. I mean, when Governor Tommy, who's coming here in a little while, when he ran against Governor Earl in 1986, between the two of them total, they spent $3 million. 2 weeks ago, they spent $100 million. That's not inflation. I don't think. It's political inflation, but it isn't the inflation that we learn about in school. But it all comes down to, I think, gerrymandering, and I don't actually know what the solution is. The perfect solution would be a nonpartisan court. They would get the maps and would insist on only approving a fair map. And you can draw a fair map. In fact, you can look at the maps. Dale Schultz and I used to go around the state talking about against gerrymandering, and we would take a map of Wisconsin's gerrymandered seats by Republicans, and we'd take a map of Illinois gerrymandered by the Democrats, and then we would take a map of Iowa, which is not gerrymandered at all. And I don't want to make fun of 1-year-olds or 2-year-olds, but you would only have to be 1 or 2 years old you could tell which of the maps were gerrymandered, Wisconsin and Illinois, because they were just zigzag, zigzag, zigzag all over the place. And in Iowa, there were right angles. And that's the best way to do it. You don't have to study this for a long time. Right angles, not gerrymandered, zigzag, zigzag, gerrymandered.
And in Iowa, it's not just the commission. Their law says you can't split counties into multiple districts unless you have to by population. So it's not just the structure of the commission, it's also the policy they have. But another way I want to ask this question another way. So you answered my question, how could we build from the lessons of Bill's work to attempt to try to break the logjam of contemporary politics with, we'll have to wait 8 years until there's another round of redistricting or a court to step in at some undetermined point and do something. So from the other point of view, the question is, if the districts had been as gerrymandered in 1980, 82 as they are now, would Bill have given you two the time of day?
Oh, you mean when he was...
if it's just structure, then,
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because Bill believed that you could only learn from each other, and he was a man of great elegance, for those of you who didn't get a chance to meet him, an elegant demeanor and a kind of a courtly manner, but totally respectful of everyone that he met and wanting to learn from them, an intellectual curiosity that didn't stop. And he, even as he aged, and we're all aging, God knows, but he still wanted to learn from, and then realized that the way we have to go and the place we have to go is to engage and empower younger people. There's enough of us who are long of tooth doing this, who appear to have lost our imagination for a different way. And that is the big problem, is that we just keep trying to come to these same solutions over and over. And with that lunch group, the Hespins, he started to invite millennial age, because they were the youngest available at the time, to bring a group together. So we would meet a small group of the old folks and the young millennial to just talk about issues and whatever. But that was really, and I fully agreed with him, that the future lies in having a new wave of leadership with a longer arcing look at the future and a real imagination for doing things better, and who seem to get along. So that's where I think we have to be looking.
I think the one other thing I don't think is known by everybody is that there's this presumption that the maps are drawn in the year following the census, and then you have those maps for 10 years until there's another census. So everybody's going, oh boy, now we got these maps until 2032. And that's not true. The legislature can redraw the maps whenever it wants. It could literally, legally, redraw the maps every 2 years if they wanted to. Or a court could have a case come to them, which would lead to them doing the drawing. And if you had if you hopefully had a very fair-minded court, they could redraw the maps during that 10-year period too. So the issue, as serious as it is, it also has some hope in that it doesn't necessarily have to be this way until 2032. But our court system has changed so much. I can remember, used to be when you ran for the Supreme Court, what you wanted to do was convince the voters that you were neither a Republican or a Democrat or a liberal or conservative. And what the strongest candidate would do, the fastest one would do, was they would run it, they would find a former Democratic governor and a former Republican governor, and they would announce the next day that they're co-chairs of their committee for the Supreme Court, or these two former governors of both parties, and that generally helped them win. And the two former justices, or governors, the two former governors didn't particularly want to be back and losers all the time. So, you usually get them to go with the favorite probably in the first place. But that's the way you ran for the Supreme Court then, was to prove to the people that you were fair and you were down the middle. And now we do just the opposite. We do with a ton of money, and ads that are, the ads for the court you couldn't tell the difference between them and the partisan ads of this past, earlier this month in November. It's just, I'm more worried about gerrymandering than as much as I am about the big money and the dirty money, and we can't trace the source of the money and so on, because as far as our legislature goes, to start with, money, the gerrymandering world, money doesn't matter.
I don't want to lose sight of an essential part of the man who taught us civic renewal and civility, was that he believed very much in the strength of the parties, and that strong parties would be better than the system that we had, as this thought came through his writings. But he had nostalgia for a Republican Party that it doesn't exist today, and I'll tell you what he wrote about that. But he laments in one of his pieces that the GOP used to be where voters went who believed the public sector had a legitimate, if not starring, role to play in society. And he wrote that long after Ronald Reagan was in office, who taught us best government is no government. But he believed that the functioning that it was imperative to have strong parties. And then in December of 2017, he wrote an obituary for John Anderson, former U.S. Senator, and he wrote an obituary for the GOP. And that was not an easy thing, I'm sure, right, Tony? I mean, he had believed in the goodness of that and believed in the importance of that conversation between two parties, that if there were intellectual honesty, would be an ever enriching and empowering conversation for a democracy.
It's so interesting to hear you say how Kraus believed in strong parties. Last week, I had the chance to moderate a panel discussion about the election here in Wisconsin for the Isthmus magazine, or Isthmus newspaper, sorry. It's been a long day. And one of our panelists, Julia Azari, who's a professor at Marquette, has written extensively on the era we are in now, which she calls weak parties but strong partisanship. And I wonder, as people who served during the era where this slow tidal wave began building, like, how has this happened in Wisconsin? How did we go from an era of strong parties, bipartisan cooperation, Republican governor winning an election by a couple of touchdowns, but Democratic senators also winning statewide elections by healthy margins, compromise in state legislature, to the weaker parties but stronger partisanship that we now face? Is it as simple as Act 10, or is it something more subtle?
No.
Tell us what
It's all
happened.
about money in politics, because the parties weren't the source of the big money anymore. And so the people running for office were turning to other sources, and that changed the whole dynamic. And the whole industry for politics, for running for office, became and now that doesn't sound like a lot, but 20 years ago it sounded like a lot, a multi-billion-dollar industry. And that's where his comment about mercenaries came from, is that the people working in politics, it wasn't the retail, get volunteers, you raised money to have a message on air as much as you could, and the rest of the workers were really volunteers. But then you couldn't do it that way because all the money goes on TV, and the people who help you get it there and make those ads and all of that are making an extraordinary amount of money off of this system without making a contribution to it, really.
Tim, how about you? Why are we in the predicament we are in now?
Well, I think some numbers might make this clearer, I guess. When I was majority leader, at that time, there were always four political parties in the legislature. There was the State Senate Democratic Committee, the State Senate Republican Committee, and the same two type committees in the Assembly. And our committee could raise money. The State Senate Democratic Committee, and I was essentially in charge of it. The maximum amount of money that we could raise to help our candidates over a 2-year period was $150,000 over 2 years. And a lot of that money, frankly, we would give $5,000 to a candidate just to thank them for running. They didn't have a chance in the world of winning, but they bring their aunt and uncle and cousin to vote Democratic too. So it was always worth it. That was Pat Lucy's theory. Get all the relatives, have every seat filled with a candidate, and then get their relatives to vote, and it'll help everybody else. But anyway, you go from $150,000 over 2 years to today, it is unlimited. And so what's happened, and Barb touched on it, is the money used to flow from the wealthy, whether it was companies or individuals or whatever. It used to flow to the candidates. But now the campaign committees of the four houses, in the legislature of the four committees of two parties, now they can accept not $150,000 every 2 years, unlimited amounts of money. So now it is a way for people who want to give a lot of money to still do it, but if they don't want the world to know it was them or their neighbor or maybe even their spouse, it works this way. Tim Cullen wants to give $1 million to the Republican Party candidates.
That would make the news.
That would be news. And it would be news to me that I got $1 million. I can give that money. One way is I just give it to the state Senate Democratic or Republican committee. Another way is you can have these phony committees. Committee for a Better America. These committees always have beautiful names. You ever notice that? There's a committee set up just for this purpose. Citizens for a Better America. I give my $1 million to the Citizens for a Better America. The Citizens for a Better America give my $1 million to the State Senate Democratic Committee. So my name is now lost in history. No one knows where that $1 million came from. The State Senate Democratic Committee has to report to the state the money they raised and who they raised it from. Who did they raise the money from? They raised $1 million from the Citizens for a Better America Committee. And then they give the money to the candidate. Where'd the candidate get the money? They got it from the State Senate Democratic Committee. And the average citizen says, well, that makes sense. Why wouldn't the State Senate Democratic Committee help a Democratic candidate for office? That's what they're there for. That's what's going on. It isn't just the amount of money that's getting spent. It's the ability to hide it. Just since Walker was governor, we used to have a maximum amount of money that an individual could give a candidate for governor. And I think Attorney General and probably a few other, was $10,000. And the Republicans changed the law to now it's $20,000. And you think, well, that's a lot of money. But what's happened is they also changed the law that the political parties could take unlimited amounts of money. So now, for wealthy people who used to be able to get away with 20 grand to their candidate for governor or U.S. senator, they have just begun to fight, as somebody said a long time before me. Because once you give your $20,000 to the gubernatorial candidate or U.S. Senate candidate, the next day you get the phone call that, are you aware that you can also give money to the state Democratic Party or state Republican Party, whichever it is, and all of a sudden you're a cheapskate at only 20 grand. And that's just the beginning to get you to have to give a whole lot more. So it's the money, it's the size of the money and the ability to hide it that are two problems that I think are very serious. I wish we had Bill Kraus here to help us fix that one. I don't know how to fix it exactly, but and the average public citizens don't have any idea that that's going on at all. And you are all pretty informed on this kind of stuff, or you wouldn't even be here today, I don't think. Many of you might not have known that, but just think the average citizen has no idea where all this money is coming from. Like in case of Tim Michael, where he had to give his own money, that had to be disclosed because where the money came from. But if it isn't, unless it's the candidate's own money, we're never going to know. And I can assure you, when they give that kind of money, that the legislative leaders know exactly who gave the money, and they know exactly what they want. And then some bill passes 8 months later, and people have no connection between Joe or Mary Smith that gave the money and what was actually became law 8 months later.
This is a little depressing. And one of the reasons I think it's depressing is that part of what drew us here today was thinking about how compromise across party lines was possible, how the work Bill did, sometimes with the two of you, made achievements for our state, whether it's, but I guess on the other hand, the two we've talked about the most today are the establishment of the UW system and the passage of a gay rights bill in 1982. These are two things that Democrats tend to like. But as we think about trying to figure out ways through the current gridlock our state system has, and recognizing the very real structural problems that gerrymandering and money in politics cause, I worry that the conclusion to people in the room or on the live stream might be, well, it doesn't matter what I do, and it doesn't matter who runs, and it doesn't matter who's in the room, because these structures drive results. tell me that that's wrong, or confirm that that is right.
That-
With the microphone, though.
Oh, sorry. And those things are true, that we really can't change it. But that doesn't mean that we don't have ways to do it as citizens, and that they aren't really right at our fingertips for organizing, but we do have to decide to do it. And we do have to get engaged as citizens in politics, and that's where we miss somebody like Bill with his engaging way and good sense of humor that drew people together to talk who cared. Because just like with the concealed carry versus campaign finance reform, actually most of us agree on the most essential things, and in fact on cleaning up politics and money and gerrymandering, we do. So why doesn't anybody we elect believe that and have to work toward that? So that's on us, actually. That's a really important thing. Bill was unbelievably good-humored, and I just want to inject this for a minute, if I can, because I think it's important to remember his voice. He wrote a 69-page co-wrote pamphlet, I guess, would you call it, a book, in the late 70s about empowering women managers, or that this is a movement that has come, and now what are we going to do? Because real work toward equity in the workplace hadn't arrived. And in his preface, he ends his preface saying, well, what we have compiled here then are the things we have learned. It's a collection of observations, conclusions, assertions, feelings, even a few facts. We assume there's something here to offend everyone. That was the way that you can start a conversation with people that disagree with you, right? And that was always his way, to have that kind of self-deprecating humor that gave you a path into, let's explore this together. But I have to read to you the last paragraph, if I can get that back, of this piece, which I really loved, and this is again showing his way of hammering home his conclusion in such an artful way. As a final note, we have observed that the history of organized religion shows a consistent affinity for power and money. So even those who presume to tell us who God is and what he wants from each of us may in this new configuration discover that she wants us to be equals. Don't bet against it. That's Bill Kraus. That's what we all need to learn, and that style and sense of fun that is to be found. I disagreed with the way, or with what Beth said, but I don't think it was her intent this morning when she said, we need less politics. No, we need less rancor, and we need to stray from the kinds of things that raise our blood pressure. And Bill's message about the citizen politician and citizens getting involved was so critical. Pericles said, we don't say that a man who has no interest in politics is a man who minds his own business. He says he has no business here at all. And that's pretty much the way it is today, that we have no business except politics. If it matters, it matters.
How about you, Tim?
You're talking about Bill, and I wanted to make sure that before this ended that I give my favorite example I think of all about Bill's, who he was and how he was, and how much issues mattered to him more than candidates and parties and so on. There was an issue back in the late 60s, early 70s that the older people in this campus will never forget. It's called UW merger. Anybody, some of you maybe heard about that. And it began in the 60s with under Republican Governor Knowles, Robert Knowles. Not Robert, that was his brother, Warren Knowles. And Bill Kraus was helping Governor Knowles, and Bill Kraus believed in merging. Right? Merging, what was going on was UW-Madison had its own board of regents and its own system. Then all the rest of the four-year campuses in the state had a whole nother board of regents. And it led to a lot of wasteful spending and a lot of problems. And so the answer Governor Knowles thought was, and Bill, was to merge them all together under one board of regents. And all the outstate places would no longer be like Whitewater State University, they would be UW Whitewater and so on around the state. And of course, there are a lot of folks in this town, I hope I don't get thrown out of this building, but a lot of people in this town, the university, disliked it tremendously because they believed that it was going to diminish the value of the UW-Madison title. That across the country, people won't know whether UW-Platteville is more important or UW-Madison is more important. Of course, time has shown that that hasn't changed a bit. I think the people still know who the Badgers are, and they're here in Madison, the teams, I mean. So Bill helps Knowles for like 3 or 4 years, and it gets to be 1970, Knowles decides not to serve for another term. And there's an election, and the winner of the election is Patrick J. Lucey, the Democrat. And Lucey was in favor of merger as well. Kraus didn't, I don't think he spent 3 seconds. There was no problem. He'd been helping a Republican governor for 4 years on something he believed in. He'll start helping a Democratic governor on something he believes in. And he did help. He did help Governor Lucey, and of course merger passed under Lucey, and it was very controversial to the end. And I think for some of the older people on this campus, probably retired now, it's I'm sure they're still very familiar with what happened. But I thought I just told Bill Kraus that the Bill Kraus that I love so much was the guy who, yes, he was Republican. Yes, he cared about the Republican Party, but he cared about what he cared about. He cared about the issues he believed in, and however got that issue done that he believed in, whoever did it, he was going to help him do it. And I thought that's the merger story tells it.
Don't you think that too? One of his most brilliant things that he did. I mean, there were many, and Marcia could tell us many of the Dreyfus campaign. It was as somebody had said earlier today, it was this very low budget campaign with a relatively unknown candidate on a red vest, traveling the state. But what they did was they set up, this university made me think of it, they set up a gubernatorial debate on every single UW campus, each one on a single topic, so that actually voters had a chance to understand how these different candidates would approach those topics, those issues, those policy conundrums. And because it was so unusual to get that kind of experience, and because we still had daily newspapers across the state that weren't all under one ownership, and that actually had enough people on staff to cover, those were covered. And the candidates became known, and an unknown candidate could actually win. Maybe it was the primary, Carly.
Yeah.
Was Carly a Republican?
Who was the fool?
No,
Who wasn't?
that was the final. That was not in the.
So
Right.
was Schreiber and Dreyfus?
In general, but Dreyfus ran against Fuller.
Cast
One of the two.
So
Carly. Wasn't it? Who did he run against in the primary?
In the general, it was Barney Schreiber.
oh
Yes.
yeah,
I
incumbent.
know that, but who did he run against in the primary? Was it Caston?
But Dreyfus also debated Carly.
I'm enjoying the live fact checks from the audience. This is
That's
great.
it.
My point is
Carly agreed to the debates, and it gave them something crazy and new, but valuable.
but you talk about IQ levels. You think it's a good idea to agree to have these debates on all the campuses across the state with a chancellor? I mean, who would agree to go to Dreyfus's, space, really, every campus in the state, and go debate him on his turf?
Well,
That's amazing.
It is.
When you think back.
The whole thing is the imagination to do it differently and to think about how we can make sure that he had great faith in the wisdom or the wisdom of citizens in voting, but it was up to us to make sure that in every way possible they had access to information to make the best choices possible. But he had great faith in their instincts as well. But this was just one of those brilliant ways to take hold of the money machine and even without money, run it. Right?
We have roughly 2 minutes. I'd like to ask you both the same question. If there's one thing people watching or people in the room should know about Bill and how they might apply that to their own civic engagement, it would be
intellectual honesty was a trademark of Bill's, along with his good humor and elegance. And it's what's most missing in politics today. And if you both have it and maintain it yourself, but insist on it, that's a simple thing to ask, but a critical thing to ask, because when that is the grounds for a conversation, then we can get somewhere, anywhere.
I would agree with all that. And maybe I just might add one word, maybe disability, maybe that's included in your words, but you couldn't get together with Bill Kraus.
Could you hold the mic closer to you?
You could not get together with Bill Kraus and have a conversation with him and feel like, and then it would turn mean, or they would end in an argument. It just wasn't Bill Kraus, and that ability to communicate with anybody, whether they agreed with him or not, and try to move the issue towards Bill. I think that was his greatest strength. Is he was, bottom line, he was a nice guy, and
Respectful. I mean, that his respect for everyone he encountered and curiosity. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate your kindness and are respectful of your willingness to come and share memories of Bill here today. Thank you.